Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Amari's Revenge. The goddess next door is confronted by a Nubian queen out for revenge at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this inaugural Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Amari's Revenge in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Marvel Comics is relaunching the X-Men, and we're told that nothing is going to be the same after this relaunch. Unfortunately, we've heard this about 4 times in the history of the X comics since 1975. And this Marvel relaunch of the X-Men really isn't being done to organically restart the series at a point where readers can get into the stories. No, this is basically a glorified cash grab by Disney, the owner of Marvel, as they look to try to synchronize and synergize the X-Men comics with the X-Men 97 animated series. Now, the reason why Disney wants to synchronize and synergize the X comics continuity with the animated series is because they know that there possibly are going to be a lot of readers who were out here watching the TV show, and they want to try to incentivize those readers to go visit one of the less than 1,000 comic shops to go pick up some of these X books. And Disney is basically, as they're relaunching these books, hoping that someone will pick up one of the multiple titles that are going to be launched as part of this relaunch, and hope that they see something that they like in one of these books. That's what they are hoping for over at Disney, as they've suffered in a major decline in their superhero properties ever since the MCU went into a state of decline after Avengers Endgame, and they're hoping to try to build some momentum with this X relaunch as they look to try to walk away from the Krakoa era of X-Men that has been going on for the last couple of years. Now, when I look at this relaunch from a publisher's perspective, I don't really think it's going to do well overall, even though they're trying to synchronize it with the Disney Plus series, and I don't think it's going to do well because the editorial really didn't take the time to try to execute a concept that would be something that would be appealing to all of those people who watched the X-Men 97 show and then would go back to watch the original X-Men animated series from 1992. And that's because the entire concept of X-Men was radically changed by Jonathan Hickman as he introduced his powers of X a couple of years ago. And as he introduced his powers of X, it basically changed the entire dynamics and the paradigm of the X-Men, which were originally based on Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's idea of mutants, and there being the idea of a group of mutants led by Professor X, who were about trying to be a part of the world and work with the world towards solutions, and Magneto, a mutant who was considered to be an evil mutant because he wanted to make the world a place for mutants where mutants would be the ones in charge of it. Now, Jonathan Hickman's whole Krakoa era basically took concepts from the Giant-Size X-Men #1, where they fought in the revamp against this Krakoa island, which was a mutant, and made that island into a nation in and of itself for mutants. Now, this took us out of the whole good mutant and evil mutant paradigm and had all of the mutants working together and getting to know each other. And as these mutants basically came together on this island, they became their own nation. And as they became their own nation, they became very elitist and very distant from the world. Moreover, they then went over to other planets like Mars to conquer those planets. And as they went to Mars to conquer that planet and create their own mutant empire, that's when the entire concept of Krakoa basically fell under its whole weight and collapsed. And as it collapsed, it basically walked away from the entire mission of Charles Xavier, who was now a part of Krakoa's head as one of their council members. So the entire concept has completely changed from what was originally presented, and that's where there's going to be a bit of a problem with this relaunch, which wants us to go back to good mutants versus evil mutants, and it just doesn't work because you've taken us so far away from the concept that it no longer looks or appears like the original concept that is currently presented in the X-Men 97 show. So instead of us getting something that appears to be similar to what we see on TV, what's going to happen is many of the comic fans out here, what they're going to do if they do find a comic shop to go to, because most of the comic shops in here in places like New York have closed, like Jim Hanley's Universe, Village Comics, and I just heard about another comic shop closing. So it's going to be very hard for people to get these comics at the shop, and when they do, they're going to find these characters radically different from what they saw on the TV show. So that's a major problem, because the concept, again, Jonathan Hickman completely changed it, and the concept became so diluted towards the last days of the entire run, which is now running to its conclusion in fall of X, that I just see this relaunch falling completely flat. And I see it falling completely flat not only because the concept is so radically different than what Stan Lee and Jack Kirby imagined, but I also see it falling flat because the complete execution of concept is not really being done well by editorial. Now, one of the big problems over at Marvel Comics is that editorial has been in shambles ever since, I would say, about 1995, and it's got progressively worse as inexperienced editors have gotten a hold of Marvel's characters, because Disney basically sees the whole publishing division as something they'll take a loss on in order to be able to make merchandise and generate sales of the intellectual property through sales of merchandise like action figures and movies and TV shows. So the comics basically are in shambles because editorial doesn't really understand how to build a brand for a property like the X-Men. And what they're doing as related to their whole plan is they're launching, I think, about 7 or 8 books, and that's way too many for a new reader to get into. It's like they haven't learned anything from the mess that they made of the Krakoa era, which basically started out with just 2 or 3 books, which was a great entry point for a new reader. And instead, what they wanted to do was go for a cash grab at the comic shops by launching multiple books. And now, like the 1980s, they've basically launched over 9 to 10 books, and that's just way too many for most of the few readers to get into. So they basically, in the Krakoa era, launched as many books as they did during the 1980s and 1990s, when they were just basically launching X books basically everywhere. And that strategy diluted the entire story to the point where it really wasn't of quality. And the same thing is being done here with this relaunch of the X-Men. What they're doing is going to relaunch all of these books by putting 9 titles out at the same time, or 8 titles out at the same time, not really thinking about the mission of those books and establishing a mission for those books, because as a guy who writes multiple series myself that are in continuity with each other, like Isis John Haynes and Esteem, I understand that less is more, and in order for the story to have more impact, you need to have less books out. Unfortunately, a lot of these editors grew up in the days of the 90s and the early 2000s, when they were putting out multiple X books, not understanding putting out more books means it's harder for people to get into the story and get into the characters, while less books, like I had in the mid to late 80s, where we only had X-Men and X-Factor and New Mutants. We only had 3 books in the mid to late 80s. Then we had Excalibur and come out, and New Mutants was turned into X-Force, but was only 4 books. And 4 books was easier to follow than going out here and dealing with multiple titles. It just becomes a bit of a headache as related to story, and it also hurts the wallet because these books are very expensive. So I see this not really working out too well, because there's just too many titles over a course of a month to follow, and people just don't have that kind of money. At $5 a book, 5 times 8 is about $40, and that's a lot of money for the average person who does finally gets to the comic shop to pick up these books. Now, the other problem I'm having with editorial as related to these books is the lack of experience that's being put on these titles. I mean, when I looked at the writing teams for the center books of Uncanny X-Men, X-Men, and Exceptional X-Men, I've got to really look at this and say, I don't think these people are qualified to write these books. Yes, Gail Simone has been around for an extended period of time, but I really don't see her as being the right person to be on the lead X-Men book, because Gail Simone has basically lost a step as related to her writing, the same way that Chuck Dixon lost a step on that Alpha Core book, and she's not really in a good place to be running a flagship title for Marvel. She's not ready, and that's where I see where this book could have problems, because again, you only get one shot at making a first impression, and hiring someone who's basically past their prime and not in a good place could really damage a brand that's already suffered a bit of damage over the last couple of years due to poor supervision from the editorial department, which took the Krakoa era and turned it into a complete mess. Now, the other writer, Jed MacKay, has been known for being consistent on books like Moon Knight, but he basically hasn't been consistent on Avengers, and I think he's basically feeling a bit overwhelmed just working on 2 books. So I don't know if he's a good fit for this new X-Men book, which has Cyclops as the leader. I don't know if he's going to be able to do it if he's already struggling with Moon Knight and Avengers, and again having two books and struggling with 2 and then going to 3. That may not be a good fit for him. I really think that they're putting too much on Jed MacKay. They're trying to make him into a guy like Chris Claremont, not understanding the damage that was done to Chris Claremont when he was trying to do 2 and 3 X books. It basically overwhelmed him, and it led to a decline in quality of his writing in 1988. And that's not editorial looking out for their talent. It's basically them trying to overwork their talent in an effort to make as much money as possible, because when X-Men was hot, they basically had Chris Claremont doing double and triple duty on books like X-Men, New Mutants, Excalibur, and if it wasn't for Louise Simonson on X Factor, he would basically be overwhelmed. So I'm not really thinking that this book is going to be that solid. Yeah, the art may look kind of nice on the poster, but I'm not really feeling the writers, especially the Exceptional X-Men book by Eve L. Ewing, who was formerly of Ironheart, a very awkward book. And Eve Ewing's lack of experience, I don't think she's ready for this kind of project. I mean, if this is your flagship book, I would say that Marvel should be having editorial bring in veteran writers to come in and relaunch the X-Men. Marvel really needs to go back and find their veteran writers, because if you want to get people into the comic shops and get their trust, I would think you would want to go find some veteran writers who have a good handle on the characters. But I don't think many were interested in trying to get that project, because the X-Men have been so radically changed by Jonathan Hickman's whole Krakoa storyline that it's hard to get them back on the good mutants versus evil mutants story, because once you've had all the mutants basically united on a island as their own country and going against the rest of the world, it's going to be hard for people to relate to these characters and see them as heroes when they've been participating in some very douchebaggery behavior towards people. I mean, it's hard to get people to say, I sympathize with these people in their struggle, when they had their own nation, they basically treated people like crap. I mean, that's going to be a tough sell as related to the X-Men, because the X-Men in the comics in no way, shape, or form resemble the characters from the comics people grew up with, and that may be the toughest sell for the X-Men as related to this relaunch, which I believe possibly will do like many other comics have been over the last, I'd say, about 25 to 30 years, what has happened with most comics is as we reboot these books, what they do is get a lot of publicity in the beginning, and then after they get the publicity in the beginning and maybe a strong sale of the first issue, those books usually drop in 6 months, and then they wind up cratering in 12 because people just aren't into these characters, and with the really poor distribution these days, it's harder to find these characters. So I'm not having much faith in this X relaunch based on the paradigm of comics as related to business model, and I also have less faith in it because these inexperienced creative teams and the incompetent editorial guiding them. I mean, with Jordan White basically guiding the X-Men in the Krakoa era, he steered it straight into the ground, and I don't see a way for him to steer it back up, especially with these inexperienced X-teams. I don't really see the X-Men being exceptional this time because there's no seasoned veterans with a sense of these characters, and even a seasoned veteran or a seasoned publisher like myself, there's problems with this book because the X-Men have become so elitist that we really cannot connect with them and see common people who want to be a part of the world when they took time to go create a nation to be away from it. I mean, that's what makes it a tough sell as related to story. You've radically changed the entire concept of X-Men, walking away from the original mission of Charles Xavier. You've changed characters like the Beast drastically to the point where you had to time travel and bring him back to get him back on point. And you've basically made a lot of these characters harder to relate to the average everyday person. So this may be a tough relaunch, and I don't think it's going to get much momentum because I don't see anything exceptional about this X-Men relaunch. All I see are characters who basically lost their way, and like Comics Matter, your boy Zach has made a comment on in one of his videos. He wishes there was a whole set of a whole pocket universe of these characters the way they were in the 90s and the 80s that we could go back to, because that's the only way I see these books doing well, because this current concept, I don't really think it's executed well, and I don't think it's strong enough to be able to get you to the sales numbers that the X-Men had during its prime heyday, when X-Men was selling close to 6 figures every month. No, this X-Men relaunch ain't gonna do those kind of numbers, and I doubt that most people would be interested in reading about this X-Men after they read all about the Krakoa era and how these characters were radically changed from what they originally were. Now, my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, is available on Lulu.com right now in paperback, and if you want to pick up a paperback copy, you can get it for the same price as it was on the 2022 Kickstarter by clicking the link in the description box. And my first digital comic that I've done with Bill Walko, Esteem No Good Deed, is available on Kindle for 99 cents right now, and you can get that comic on Kindle for just under $1, and it's a lot of fun. And you can also find that comic in the back of the Esteem series book, Esteem Blast from the Past, which is on Amazon.com in paperback, along with the rest of the books of the SJS Direct universe, which include the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, Spellbound, The Legendary Mad Matilda and Spinsterella, and my vampire novel, Eternal Night. And you can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and you can also find some of the SJS Direct Universe books at big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you want to help me be able to make the next full SJS Direct comic, which I want to feature Isis the Goddess next door, you can send a donation to the PayPal or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Coming to paperback and e-readers, Isis Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Isis Dark Incubus at Amazon.com and other online booksellers everywhere. Coming to paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this all-new Esteem series adventure. Pre-order your copy of esteemed Horror in the Hamptons in digital format at Amazon.com, Google Play, Draft2Digital, and other digital booksellers, or pick up your paperback copy on May 24th. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.